I actually feel like I've lived like 10 different lives already. Definitely, I would have said a professional dancer, and I wanted to dance behind Janet Jackson. It takes a lot of graft and a lot of no's, like a lot of no's. Dance, a little bit like music and acting from what I understand, in that space anyway, it is not always consistent. You may have a run at a theatre, like a theatre production, but then after that, you're always looking for new work. So if I don't ask, I'm in the same place I am right now. If I do ask and they say no, I'm in the same place I am right now. If I do ask and they say yes, I could be in a different place. I kind of looked around and felt like there's a lot of people in Black Britain who are doing some really amazing things. Why does nobody know? And it literally was born out of that, like, someone needs to tell people. Treasure Chest exists, that Vitae London exists, Out the Box exists, Jammy exists, that UK Black Business Show exists. I did that for 7 years. I definitely felt like in order for me to spearhead Gynae in a way that is impactful, I needed to let go of something. And in other news, what's the something? I felt really guilty, and I really felt like I was letting people down. But for something that's so crucial to a woman's anatomy and also to creating the population, like, why is there no system in place to support women in this area?
First, ask you, what is your story?
Oof.
Welcome to another episode of Everyday Leadership. And you know, I like having conversations with remarkable people do remarkable things. And today is no different. I have someone who is a copywriter, someone who has been doing this media thing for a very long time as well. She used to run an amazing organization called In the Other News. She's now the founder of the Gynae Project, and she is multifaceted in so many ways that we're going to definitely delve into in today's interview. I'm talking none other than Candace Oxley. How are you doing? So I am curious with everything that you do. How do you like to be introduced? What is important that people know about you when they talk about you?
What a great opening question. I think for me, the most important thing is a storyteller, a connector, and an advocate. I'd say those three words for me in my own self-description would be words that I'd use to describe myself. And I hope that my work and works over the years have demonstrated that I'm a connector of people and opportunities, a storyteller naturally, and kind of inherently, and also an advocate for people, places, and businesses, communities that are often, their stories are kind of either misunderstood or untold altogether.
Have you always been a storyteller? For us to go back to a younger you, the first 10 years of your life,
Mhm.
were you a storyteller in those days?
I would say so. I would say so. So the first way, I always say, the first way I told a story was through dance. So as a child, I used to dance and danced from the age of 5 to 25 consistently. So essentially had a 20-year dance span. And I often describe dance as a visual representation of music. And that for me is a beautiful hybrid of creating movement that tells the story that the song is displaying. So in a lot of ways, I think my storytelling days of bringing words to life and a story to life started when I was 5. I also used to write stories on car journeys when I was going places with my parents. So by the time we left our house and where we got to our destination, I'd have written what I'd seen, what I'd felt, what I'd experienced. And a friend of mine in school, we actually wrote a story based on the relationship that we had with our dads. Her last name is we as life would have it, we've kind of gone separate paths. But her last name is Tatham, I want to say, and my last name is Oxley, and I want to say we called it the Oxley Tatham Diaries, of where we talked about how we had what our relationships was like with our dads, what we learned from our dads that day, and we called it the Oxley Tatham Diaries. So I think in a lot of ways, storytelling has always been a really integral part of who I am.
So what is, I'm curious, first ask you, what is your story? What would you say?
Oof, is what I would say. That is what I would actually say if you're really asking. Um, but I'd say um, I've often said, especially in recent years, I actually feel like I've lived like 10 different lives already, um, because I've always been open to exploring options and exploring work and industries and activities are that make me feel curious, that make me feel creative. So I'd say my story kind of starts with curiosity, and then that starts with how my parents kind of saw the world. They were very, well, not they were, they are very open to exploring your options in life. So when I was a child, they ensured that I took all different like extracurricular activities. So I did swimming, I learned to ride a bike, I did dance, I did like athletics, all of these different things because they wanted to give me options to see what thing I kind of gravitated towards the most. I learned how to play the piano and the clarinet. I also like lent my hand to drumming a little bit later in life. So in a lot of ways, it's always stemmed from being having a really curious family and like allowing that curiosity to fuel my decision making. Um, yeah, kind of as a child, I'm an only child as well. But I think in a lot of ways, being an only child is kind of one of my highest and most important parts of my story because I feel it's almost the what's the word I'm looking for, the duality of loving my own company but equally loving to be around community, and they both intersect in a way that helps me like feel really aligned and at home in myself and not feel like I've always got to be around people, but when I am around people I feel really alive and really excited and really exhilarated. um I grew up in the kind of average black family, full of culture, heavily influenced by music, and the arts. A lot of my cousins, all of us, did something creative growing up. Interestingly, most of the women did dance, and we kind of made that thread only recently. Um, and yeah, I'd say that I've lived in London most of my life. I then travelled to Atlanta to go to uni for my second year, which was a life highlight, I'd say, and a massive learning curve to transition from the UK to the US at 20, and just understand what it's like to live and be somewhere else, especially as a black Brit. Like, immediately, you're like, interesting. And you're like, oh, wow, there's black people in London? Wow. One of my roommates actually asked me at the time when I went, it was we were gearing up to the royal wedding, and one of my roommates asked me, "Are you guys all going to the royal wedding?" And I was like, "What? Are we all the whole of Britain are going to the royal wedding? Like William and Kate's wedding? You think the whole of Britain is going to the royal wedding?" He's like, "No, we're not. We're not going to." And this is like, and another thing one of my other roommates asked me was that, do we have American TV? And when they show it in England, do they have a British accent? And I was like, again, no, they don't. But it's that lack of information. And because, especially when it comes to black culture in the West, America seems to always and has always been the blueprint. So there's no other intersection or no other country that ever speaks to the black experience in a way that had ever spoken to the black experience the way that the Americans have. So they were really confused that, wow, like, you're not going to the royal wedding. England is like this small. Like, how come you're all not invited? Or like, how come when you watch American TV people aren't speaking in an English accent? And I'm like, it's because it's American TV and it's translated to the UK. It's not subtitled. It's just the TV. And I think moving to the States for that time was, yeah, as I said, a life highlight. And then after that, kind of transitioning into work and the professional. the professional space, and that's been a journey of curiosity, exploration, opportunity finding in itself.
What did you study at uni?
I actually studied dance at uni, so carried on with
Yeah,
the
figured
dance
as
journey.
much. So I was curious about that actually, because when you say you've been doing dance for 20 plus years of your life, I figured that you were sort of carried on exploring that. And that's where my curiosity kind of peeks into that. 'Cause I'm like, you were doing dance, sounds like a very high level, and it was such an ingrained part of your life. And then you shifted from dance into a whole different career. I'm curious, like, was there something that sparked that shift and that change for you?
There was. I was actually on tour with a dance company called Uchenna Dance, and there was a couple of opportunities that came up off the back of that. But after that, I was really thinking about, do I want to continue with dance as my career, or are there other areas in my life and other curiosities that I have professionally that I'd be keen to explore? And I decided to explore other things. And I actually, in that exploration, is where I landed a role at Soho House. So I kind of moved away from creative practitioner into creative space. And that transition was really, again, a real highlight and a real taste of like working at a big. I'd actually worked at some big corporations before. So out of uni, my first job was at Sky, um, and I was part of the team that built the customer service funnel for Now TV. And at the time, like Now TV, there was no on-demand TV. Now TV was the first, so it was really, again, curiosity, and I was like fueled by that. Like, this is interesting. There's going to be a service where you don't go to Blockbuster anymore, and you can sit at home and you can watch movies and series all from your TV, all powered by this little black box. How does that work? So after working there and kind of still dancing in between, because our team was all part time, when I got the opportunity to work at Soho House, I just decided, you know what, this is something new, this is something fresh, and I can still train. And as and when performance opportunities come up, I can still kind of factor them in terms of like just taking annual leave and stuff like that. But I just thought, you know what, I'd be keen to see what the more traditional working world looks like, and to see how I feel about it.
When you were younger, and if someone had asked you what did you want to become, what would you have said?
Oh, definitely, I would have said a dancer, a professional dancer, and I wanted to dance behind Janet Jackson.
Did you actually do that?
I didn't manage to do that. What I did do was dance at her concert 2 weeks ago. So we're kind of there. We're kind of there. And so so she was in front of me and I was dancing in front of her, but I wasn't dancing with her as such. But yeah, I feel like that's always been like a big dance dream. Like that's like the top of the goal for me, to dance with Janet Jackson.
I've spoken to a couple of people I know who are also dances their life, and I've seen them make pivots, and they've all talked about how like the amount of time and like dancers are a big football player for want of a better word. Like the amount of time and effort and dedication that you have to give to the craft is a lot. And I was asked the question like, so how do you pivot from, in your case, like 20 plus years of being in this craft, moving to a different country, coming back, being part of a crew, starting to do stuff, and then deciding that, you know what, I'm gonna go down this traditional-esque corporate path to explore and see what it's like. Because that's a new identity that you're stepping into completely.
Hmm. It is. It is completely. Um, and I think it, similarly to some of the other creatives that you've spoken to, as much as I agree, it takes a lot of time and effort and commitment, as does anything. I think the difference with dance is that the responsibilities on your physical body is different from the responsibility in other spaces. And as much as there's probably nuance to that in terms of like working in a place that you maybe don't love and then the mental implications of that, but I think from a very like lay point of view, the physical demands on being a creative who performs, and that's like an actor, a dancer, a musician in particular, it takes a lot of graft and a lot of no's, like a lot of no's. And because dance, music, creativity in a lot of ways is subjective, if your community and people who you dance around think you're exceptional, hearing a no from someone else is like, yeah, but no, like these people think I'm sick. Like, I don't understand why I didn't get this. Like, I've got the skill, I've got the resume, I killed the routine, all of the things. Um, so it does tamper on your like self, almost actualization and self belief. Again, as does so many things. I think because of the physical demand, also dance has a shorter lifespan because there's only so long you can be boom cat cat without, you know, feeling the aches and pains in your body as we naturally age. Um, but yeah, I think for me it was definitely more about curiosity, and also in a lot of ways about financial stability, because dance, a little bit like music and acting from what I understand, in that space anyway, um, is it is not always consistent. You may have a run at a theatre, like a theatre production, but then after that, you're always looking for new work. So on top of the physical demands of like 12-hour rehearsals, learning routines, costume, makeup, performance, 2 days, like two performances a day if you're doing a matinee and an evening for 3 weeks. After that, you have to like decompress and then find another thing like that endlessly, on and on and on, until maybe you get booked with an artist as one of the resident dancers, and then whenever they're touring, you're with them. But then that's up to the artist. They might not want to tour for 18 months. They might want to tour, do a movie, write a book. So in the time they're maybe doing a movie or writing a book, you're out of work. So you're constantly on the look for like new opportunities to yeah, to grow and excel your skill set. You might book a TV gig where you're like backing dancers for like The Voice or something like that. But again, it's got to run. So in a lot of ways, especially at that time, I was 25, and I thought, okay, this is kind of the point where people, don't know who these people are, but where people, society start thinking about like really doubling down on like what they want to do in their life, what kind of career they want to take, and all of that. So I thought, you know what, maybe I should do what people are doing. So I did. Unfortunately, it has been a really beautiful and enlightening journey. But I know that's not the case for everyone who kind of moves away from their like childhood passion and kind of goes the more traditional route. But yeah, I feel grateful that the opportunities that I've had since transitioning fully from dance have yeah, have been really rewarding.
The one question you're a great person to ask this to is then, how do you handle rejections? How do you handle no's? Because, as you said, it's something that you've had to repeatedly deal with in your career. So you're a prime person to be able to give some people some wisdom on like what are the best ways and best perspectives from that first initial no that you ever had to then having a lot more experience dealing with
Yeah.
no's. I would love to learn what that transition was like for you.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, kicking and screaming. That's what I was doing. Speaking, how come? No, why? How? Why me? Ah, all of these type of things. But you're immature. You're childish. You don't understand that, like, no's are part of it. And that's something that I've had to almost relearn in this new phase and transition in my life. Like, tough seasons are part of it. Like, it's not sit dancing and roses and, singing into the sunset. So I think in a lot of ways, if somebody are like you, how would you deal with rejection? I think you have to accept that it's part of it. And the moment you accept that it's part of it, when you feel a no, you don't feel like it's a way to derail you or dissuade you from your path. It's actually like just it's doing this. A yes does this and also does a no. So I think in a lot of ways people think no's do this and make them think, oh, let me not do that, let me do something else, I got a no, blah blah blah. It actually, like, if you think you're gonna go to your path this way, the no might make you go this way. But if the point that you need to get to is here, ultimately it really in a lot of ways, and this is coming from someone who still feels like the point or the destination I haven't got to yet. So I feel really strongly that understanding that no's and rejection are part of it has helped me manage the no's. So every time I get a no, I think, all right, cool, experience. All right, cool, learnings. All right, cool. Because I think, and equally, I think it's really important that yeses are viewed the same. I think that yeses shouldn't just be viewed as the success and the torch and the trophy. I think it should also be viewed as cool, the lesson, cool, the learning. Because a no can I actually picked up a book from work a couple of days ago called Lessons in Life What Only Adversity Can Teach You. And in a lot of ways, the book speaks to the fact that, yeah, I'll send you a picture of it. If I had it with me, I would have done the influencer thing of going like this with it. Um, but it's not even it's not near me. But the book speaks to the fact, basically leans into the point I just made. Like, knows a part of it. It's part of it. Like, you can't see it as like an attack or like, no, someone's trying to put me off. It's like when someone says, unfortunately, this is not you didn't get the funding this time, or unfortunately you didn't get the role this time, and you get that generic email or no email at all. I think it's all just life's way. I'm a believer, so I also believe that it's God's way of just continuing to connect dots, um, and allowing you not to get comfortable in how you think things are going to go. Because I think some of the most beautiful like testimonies and experiences are when you can share a story that didn't go anything like you thought it was going to go, but the outcome was exceeded your expectations.
That's such a great way of looking at, I guess, life. Life is never linear. Life is always that. I would say that the rhythm of our hearts are intentional for that reason, because it reminds us that if we're just linear, we're not linear. That means that it's time to go and with the Lord, be somewhere else, depending on whatever you believe. But you describing the way that you're describing for me, I think is really, really powerful actually, because recognizing that actually the yeses are very much as important as the no's, sometimes even more important, because sometimes it's a redirection, sometimes it's a recognition of how badly do you want something, but then sometimes it's also what am I going to do once I've got this rejection? How am I going to react? And can I even look at the length of time it's taking me to deal with that first no to now to deal with the multiple no's coming down that path?
Absolutely.
So I love that response.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely agree that it's a redirection. I definitely agree that it's about reaction as well. I think that's really key what you said. And it's like that quote that kind of everyone knows. Life is, 20% what happens to you and 80% of how you respond. And I think that when you get the no, that quote is tested, because it's like, okay, are you gonna kick and scream? But I also believe that it's really important to feel your feelings, because if you, for the most part, anything that we do, we naturally want the answer to be yes, as opposed to, apart from that, if you ask someone, did you steal from me? You want them to say no. But generally speaking, any question or anything we're going for, we naturally want the answer to be yes. So when we get a no, it's a bit like, okay, this has gone against what my natural disposition. How am I going to use this remaining 80% to, how am I going to use this 20% to feel it? Like, it's upsetting. It might be frustrating. It might be like, you might feel like this was your last attempt at applying for funding, or your last attempt of trying to build something new, or your last attempt. And that 20%, I think, is really important to sit in that like human emotion of like, man, that's disappointing, or like, man, I'm frustrated about that, or like, oh, I really wanted that, man. But then it's that 80%, you've got 4 times the amount of like, how can I recalibrate? What do I need to learn from this? Who do I need to maybe speak to? So next time an opportunity like this comes up, I can maybe phrase things differently, or might do like a follow up of an application, find the person who's like head of funding at the company, send your application, then send them an email. Is there another way that you can get to your that you can control your controllables ultimately? So yeah, I completely agree with what you said.
Now you're in a new career, you go roll up the Soho House, you start to do that, and then your career just goes down this path of like office manager, admin, doing a lot more writing, copywriting. It sounds like even during your dance years, that skill of storytelling never left you. It was still something that you kept up doing, hence why you could bring that skill set out
Yeah,
in a later side of your life.
yeah, 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 for sure. So yeah, post Soho House, I'm even trying to think back over my career now. Post Soho House, I actually, again, in terms of storytelling and creating the work that you want to do, I think is also really important. So when I was at Soho House, I don't know if they still have the magazine, but they used to have a magazine called House 4, and it was basically an internal magazine and also a magazine that would be at some of the houses. Like, it wasn't the like coffee table one; it was more like a like what you'd get on the shelf. Um, but in that magazine, they had loads of different sections about the business. So they had a food section. When they were developing Soho Work, they had like a interior design section, a little bit about the founder and what was going on, etc., etc. And at the time, I was looking for like copywriting gigs, just ways to like sharpen the skill set, ways to just refine my pen. And I sought out the woman who was head of content and copy for House 4, and I used to see her in the kitchen, and every morning I'd just say hi and, build rapport. And then after a while, it's like that moment when it's only you two in the kitchen. And then a conversation actually happens as opposed to like, hi, morning. And then as we got talking, I told her, oh, I'm a copywriter, but I work at the Cowshed. And at the time, they had another beauty brand called Cheeky. I work at Cowshed and Cheeky, but I'm also like really keen on like sharpening my copywriting skills. Like if there's ever an opportunity to assist you or like do some like freelance writing, let me know. And she said, actually, there is. And in that moment, I realized this is the importance of seeking out the work you want to do, even if you can't do it full time, just for experience. She was like, actually, there is. I get loads of commissions to do the writing from the food, for the food column, but like I'm kind of trying to I can't remember the word she actually said, but it said she should try to outsource that so she could focus on like the more commercial style writing that was happening in the magazine. So about the business, where it's going, the travel side, the new developments, the new houses, all of that kind of stuff. And the food stuff kind of for her at the time was just a little bit low level. So she said, oh, have you got any experience with like food writing or interviews and stuff like that? And I said, actually, I do. So wider context, about 10 how old am I? Yeah, about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, Jamelia, the founder of Treasure Chest, Jamelia and I ran a food blog called Word of Mouth London. And essentially, it was a blog to go around to different restaurants, review them, write them on our blog, and tell people about all the cool places we were eating. So we were like food influencers way before like influencers was even a term. And it's so funny. We always say, wow, we should have really kept with that because food is expensive. So we really should have just kept with that, especially with the cost of living crisis. However, as a result, I did have experience with food writing because Jamelia and I had been writing food blogs at the time for like a year and a half. So I was able to share, like, oh yeah, I actually run a food blog with my best friend. So I shared the blog. She's like, oh, this is brilliant, fantastic. So then for like 3 or 4 months, I had a contract. Like I worked at Soho House at the head office for Cowshed and Cheeky, so there's like spa and beauty treatment department. But outside of those hours, I would go with this. I forgot her name now. I'd go with the head of House 4 and do the interviews of the chefs, the chef de partie, the new restaurant owners, new menus, what's going on, and write them all up, and they would all go in the magazine. So in a lot of ways, that opportunity, as I've said like a million times now, like seeking out internal opportunities for ways to do what you want to do whilst you're doing something else is one, really good for relationship building, and two, it really helped sharpen my pen. So then when I moved after that, I think it was to Selfridges, as part of the e-commerce team for women's wear and kids wear. That helped because although I worked at Soho House in the beauty department, having written experience at Soho House alongside that helped expedite my application. So after I worked at Selfridges, and then after that, I actually think I worked at Can Lion. So I was part of and interestingly, kind of full circle ish, I worked as part of the health and pharmaceutical lion. So for context, Can Lion is an award ceremony for advertising, and it's got loads of different categories, from like sport, music, health, all the things. And I actually worked as part of the health and pharmaceutical lion to ensure that the ad agencies that were nominating their work for awards, they had all of the documents they needed. They had all of the processes were clean. Any like materials that supported their work, I had all of that. So I was the person part of the team that was like putting all of the award nominations together to make sure that when it went to judging, the judges had everything they needed, and then went to Cannes for 3.5 weeks to like do that process in the judging and jury room. And the time I initially went to Cannes was when um, Grenfell collapsed. And I'll never forget that. We were in the judging room, and in the judging room at Cannes, it's pitch black. It's like a cinema, pitch black. I'm sat behind like almost like a sound desk, and like controlling what's going on the screen, making sure everyone's got their materials, speaking to the judges about the work, giving them the context. They watch the ad, they have a discussion in the room, and we do that day after day after day. There's like 100, 200 ads that have been submitted. And then I remember I was sat there and I looked at my phone in the break, and all my group chats were just going mad. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And I was thinking, what's happened? And everyone in the room was just like, something's happened in London. Like, what's happened? Because all the judges are also from all over the world. So people from France, people from Germany, people from the US, people from like everywhere. And that was crazy. But that again was a really great opportunity, and it lent back in to storytelling. After that, I worked at McCann London, so an ad agency, and basically did their PR and internal eventing. So again, from a dance perspective, although I wasn't creating in that way, I had continued the thread of creative space um, after after dance. After dance, I feel like I'm telling you my whole CV now. There's other things after that, but I'm mindful that I don't want to take loads of time.
It's I just find it's interesting to hear how one, I think you said around that Soul House gig wasn't just around the fact that you were willing to go internally, but also there's something around the power of side hustles that I talk about a lot. I think a lot of people do things, but they don't talk about them because they just dismiss them. They're like, oh, it's not mine. No one cares about that. But you were able to leverage the side hustle that you really had and be like, no, I've got experience in doing this. And that was something that showcased your talents. And even then moving from that and that consistency of, no, I know where I want to go. I know what rooms I want to be in. I'm willing to knock on the doors. I'm willing to leverage my previous skills and transfer them across. For me, this sounds like there's a confidence that you have an ability, I guess, to handle what's the worst that can happen. All I can do is ask, right? And you step into that quite a lot, feeding your curiosity they talked about at the start, and that leads you to landing more and more opportunities. It kind of sounds like all the way throughout your career so far.
Yeah, and it's definitely that. Like I always think, like if I don't ask, I'm in the same place I am right now. If I do ask and they say no, I'm in the same place I am right now. If I do ask and they say yes, I could be in a different place. So in a lot of ways, I just think those odds for me are like worth taking the risk, because two of the three options, that's actually three, so I'm in two of the three options are the same. I stay where I am. So I'm no worse off in no option, but I could be better off. So for me, I'm always like glass half full. Let's see what could happen. Let me open myself up to the possibility of there being a positive change here. And I think that I've tried to commit to that in all facets of life. And as hard as it is, and I feel like as you get older, you get a little less fearless and a little bit more strategic. Not even fearful, I think strategic. And you care more about like how it might look or how it might come across. But I think at the end of the day, like, the day's gonna end. So people will get over it and forget it. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. So yeah.
I want to fast forward to you founding what you were doing previously in other news. How did that one come about? Why did you feel the need to start to talk about Black Britons and to delve behind businesses, initiatives, thought leaders, different things like that? And this is what, 2017. So this is pre George Floyd, like, so this was a time where I'll probably say a lot of media was negative when it comes to Black people, and there's a lot of media outlets that are also Black were dying out.
Hmm.
So why did you decide to do it at that point in time?
Um, I, in a lot of ways, was looking at I've always felt like I was quite connected to, like what I mentioned at the beginning. Like a connector is part of like my inherent personality, and I always felt like I was quite connected to culture based on the work that I've done, based on my own curiosities, based on like what I enjoy learning about. And I kind of looked around and felt like there's a lot of people in Black Britain who are doing some really amazing things. Why does nobody know? And it literally was born out of that, like, someone needs to tell people that like Treasure Chest exists, that Vitae London exists, that Out the Box exists, that Jammy exists, that UK Black Business Show exists. Like, do you know what I mean? All of these places that were really spearheading in their own space, and I just felt like, where's the press? Where's the publicity? Where's the stuff? So I started as a yeah, as almost like as a response to that, like, where's the press for these people? And kind of started it off as a blog. So I'd interview people. It was so ghetto. I'd interview people with my phone and go and like either go to their house or like would meet somewhere quiet and like sit in the car and just do the interview like that. And then I would go back home and transcribe it all. Like AI had not developed that much. So like transcribing tools, even that there was online, were really, really basic. So I might in the interview say, what's your name? And it would transcribe it as to like, what's the fame? And it was just like, this is so long trying to use technology to try to transcribe all of this, but it's equally so long listening to everything that everyone's saying, writing it down, pause, writing it down, pause. Honestly, but as far as I'm concerned, that's the groundwork that needs to be done. Like, I just knew that like there's no shortcuts. You just have to do the groundwork. And at the time, podcasts were a bit like, huh? What's a podcast? Like, isn't it just radio? Or isn't it just music? Um, so I really wanted to leverage and amplify the great things that were happening in Black Britain, because I also identified that whenever we talked about Black British success, one, it was always in kind of the media, sports, and entertainment space, and two, it was always from American lens. And I just felt like Black Britain is really being undermined here, because there's some incredible things that are happening here from a regional perspective and a global perspective that has been spearheaded by people in the UK. So as a result, started writing, interviewing loads of different people on what they were doing. But as podcasting started to take a little bit more shape, I really realized that like in keeping up with the times and also making sure that the content was tailored to the audience it was directed to, and I actually got to kill two birds with one stone. So I still did that ghetto thing of like recording the conversation on my phone, but then I uploaded it to Apple and Google Podcasts and Spotify. So now the bit of me typing it all up is gone, and I'm moving with how content consumption is moving, which was through audio. So then the business took the shape of a podcast. So I recorded podcasts, and actually did that at an advertising agency called Havas, who were really behind the theme and the concept of In Other News. And I think that was largely because there was a black woman that worked at Havas at the time. Her name's Bacola, who really was an advocate. Like, I did not have to convince her of why In Other News was important. She just understood it. She just got it, and she was like, anything we can do to help, let's help. And I was like, I actually need a space to record my podcast. She was like, do it here. And again, it's about seeking out opportunities in opportunities. It's not always, and I think it's also what that taught me is that it's really important to keep the main thing. As much as, yes, having money to pay guests or like pay myself and all of that would have been important, what I really needed was a professional space, because I was starting to interview people who I didn't know as well. So I can't just go to your house. You just can't come in my car and we just sit there and do it. Like I needed like a front facing somewhere, and I knew that that was the main thing that I needed. So I asked her for the main thing that I needed, and she said, "Yeah, man, like." So all of a sudden, when people came to record the podcast, they had a really elevated experience, because you came to this really beautiful building in King's Cross, that had, and we recorded it in this room that looked like a bookshelf, but you push it, and the door opens. So again, elevated, and it just made the whole experience feel a lot more professional. So I ran the podcast for 2.5 years, but in between that, I was doing press articles and like thought pieces. So if people were releasing like new product, or had new thought leaders come into the space, or new shows, new TV, new, yeah, all of that kind of stuff, specifically within Black Britain, new events, I would write about them. Um, and yeah, I did that for 7 years.
It sounded like you were, for want of a word, getting to the point where the name, the brand, everything you were doing was becoming a bit more well known, a bit more established because of the consistency of you doing it for so long. And at the height of what I would say, it sounds like other news was getting to, you decided to just shut it all down and start your new project. But I'm curious, it reminds me of going back to the conversation we had earlier on around you and your dance. And we're like, okay, I'm in this right now, into pivot. Now you're in this, doing it for 7 years, I'm about to pivot. The willingness or the ability to be able to know when it's time to walk away from something is not something that a lot of people can do really, really easily. How do you do it?
Um, I actually think about what, it's all kind of fueled by what type of life do I want to live, um, and where do I feel like I'm being called to right now, and in that calling, what needs to give in order for me to lean in. And especially with In Other News, what I felt was that I really felt like I was really being called to the Gynae Project. And by called, for those who maybe are not spiritual, I felt like I was being led. Like I'd have conversation with random people, and they'd talk to me about their gynecological health. I would not tell them about the Gynae Project at all. I would not tell them about the answer. I would not the answer. I would not tell them about the planning or anything. And people would just talk to me about that. And I think, that's interesting. Um, and that kept happening. Or I would go places and be sat next to someone who works in the women's health space. I thought, for all the events I've been to all my life, this has never happened. Um, so I actually initially wanted to kind of rebrand In Other News, because I felt like it needed some refreshing. And it's a bit like when people would say, in relationships, you kind of get the 7 year itch. And I felt like I kind of had that with In Other News. I was like, it kind of needs something. It kind of needs, like, I don't know what, but I kind of need to just like almost rebrand it in a way. And essentially, I wanted to do that whilst running and launching the Gynae Project. But I actually went for lunch with a really good friend of mine. His name's Paul C. Brunton, and he and I were kind of talking about life and catching up and etc. etc. And one of the things he said to me was that if the Gynae Project sounds fantastic, why do you want to keep running In Other News? And I was like, because I've been running it for a long time. And he kind of said words to the effect of, that's not a reason to keep doing something. Especially if you feel really passionate and called to what's next. Um, so in a lot of ways, he really helped give me that extra, like, to just feel okay with letting something go that I've been doing a long time, and not feeling like I have to hold on to it in order to move forward. I actually was watching a sermon yesterday, and the pastor was talking about, in order to move ahead, you often have to let go of something behind you, because you can't be pulled forward and pulled back at the same time. Because if you're pulled in both directions, you'll stay exactly where you are, because the tension can't take you either way. So in a lot of ways, I felt like I was being pulled even more so to gynae. But I do think in other news, in a lot of ways, as much as I've closed the chapter, the book is not closed, because there's definitely still in my heart and in my opinion space for that type of news to be shared. It's just about what packaging it then comes into, and all of that kind of stuff. But I definitely felt like, in order for me to spearhead gynae in a way that is impactful, um, I needed to let go of something. Um, and in other news, what's the something?
What was that journey like for you? You've got the recognition, you know what you need to do, but the letting go always sounds so easy to let go of that and to drop that. You know why you need to do it. You understand what you're stepping into next. But for holding on to something for 7 years and building from the ground up, it's I've had to let go of a company in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the turmoil
Yeah,
and the anguish I went through. I
yeah,
knew I was stepping into something better.
yeah,
But I'm curious for you, what was that like?
yeah. It was treacherous, man. It was treacherous. I felt. I also, do you know what I also felt? I felt a bit guilty. I felt a bit guilty. I felt a bit like,
Let people down.
yeah, I felt like I was letting people down. And I also kind of felt a bit
Yeah.
like, oh man, I don't know what that word is. I think it's probably just guilty, like letting people down. And I had like a 5% feeling of like, oh, I feel like I failed, man. Like people go on, like people keep going with things till the end. And interestingly, with the last episode of the podcast, I asked everyone I've interviewed to send me a question, and that podcast was a culmination of me answering the question they wanted to ask me. And it could be about anything, or anything, and or about what's next for me. And one of the questions were, how do you feel about endings? Laura Jane, her name is, and she's a psycho therapist, and she asked me, how do I feel about endings with regards to making a decision to end in other news? And I think I had to transition my mind to remembering that every ending of something is also a new beginning of something else. But equally, at some point, everything does have to end. And again, from a spiritual point of view, I'm like reminded of the scripture that says there's a time for everything. And yeah, exactly. And I think leaning into the fact that it's okay for this season to end now, and it's okay for me to lean into what's next and be okay with that. But I felt really guilty. And I really felt like I was letting people down, because when I was telling people I was closing, they're like, oh my gosh, why? No. And like all of that emotion that comes from the external did make me think, oh man, like even I was at a rave one night, out dancing, and someone came over to me and said, I can't believe you closed your podcast in the middle of the dance. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm just here trying to have the time. Like, I don't know what's going on. But like, even that, like, I was like, man, maybe I should, maybe I should keep going on. And I thought, you know what? I feel sure about the direction I want to take my life in right now. And as I said, there's a time for everything. So that time has now ended, and the new time has come.
Speaking of that new time and a new chapter, you founded the Gynae Project. What was behind you creating the Gynae Project and you starting to talk more around menstrual health, and what was your experience?
So it's fueled from personal experience, like a lot of businesses are. Um, I felt like I felt like there's something not quite right going on with my own period. And I kind of attributed it to, um, I'm me, so this is how it shows up in my body, and this person is that person, and that's how it shows up in theirs. But in doing further research, there are some fundamental things that actually should be universal across the board. So I kind of paid attention to that. But then when I wanted to get answers for why my period was becoming really crippling for me, um, it was actually a 6 year journey from like the initial conversation I had with my GP to eventually having a procedure. And so for 6 years, I was having loads of different scans, on loads of different meds, um, test results, trying something else, etc., etc., etc. And it really made me think. And unfortunately for me, after I had the procedure, my period actually got worse. So I thought, after all of that, I'm worse off. This is so frustrating. Um, and I thought there must be a better way for people to understand what's going on with their menstrual cycles. And are other women waiting this long? Like, if you had a toothache, I think you should probably get a dentist appointment within the week, 2 weeks tops. If you need to go to the optician, you could probably walk in to an optician and see someone on the day. And for me, I thought for something that's so crucial to a woman's anatomy and also to 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 creating the population, like, why is there no system in place to support women in this area? So yeah, the Gynae Project was kind of built out of the frustration of me having such a long wait time, but also wanting to empower women with a trusted hub and source of education, access, and community. So yeah, that's when the Gynae Project. That's why the Gynae Project started.
I just think there's such for something that is, for want of a better word, so common because the woman goes through it. Why do you think there is a lack of information available based on what you found so far?
I think that's it's really layered, and I think the lack of information comes from how menstruation is viewed, and I think there's a lot of shame and taboo attached to it, and also some normalcy. So like the normalization of something, in a lot of ways, takes away the the attention that the attention that it needs. So something happens regularly, people think, oh yeah, it's a normal thing. Women just go through it. It's painful, etc., etc. Okay, fine. Like, we don't need to do anything about it. But one of the overarching things that women shouldn't experience is actually pain, and most women experience pain. So, in a lot of ways, there's a gap in understanding why women are actually experiencing pain in a circumstance that they shouldn't be. But because I also think there's just a lack of information from a medical point of view. Like, GPs are general practitioners, so they're supposed to know. They're like jack of all trades, a little bit about everything. And getting to a gynecologist specifically is, one, a long process, two, expensive, um, and very much not easily found. Like, the Gynae Project started with a survey, and one of the questions was, "Do you know of a local gynecological practice in your area?" And over 70% of the respondents said no. But if I ask, "Do you know of a local opticians in your area?" 100% of respondents would say yes. So I think a lot of it is about access to information and updated information, because there's new concerns that are arising based on, in a lot of ways, like lifestyle, what's going on in women's bodies, etc., that there's just no context for. So I think in a lot of ways, people don't actually know what's going on in women's bodies, so they kind of just like leave it. It's a bit like when you see, I don't know, like a child drop something on the floor and they're wondering if anyone saw them. So it's a bit like they go and then just kind of walk out. And I think that's kind of what's happened to women's health and gynecological health in particular. It's like, we don't know, so we're just gonna head out. And actually, like, women are really struggling. And from like conversations I've had with women, like, yeah, they're really struggling, especially for something that happens once a month. And that's if your menstrual cycle is regular. If it's irregular, you could have it twice a month. You could be on your period for 20 days. I know I've heard stories of women being on their period for 3 months straight. So there's a lot to be said for like the lack of care that the systems are taking and actually equipping themselves with updated information, updated statistics on what's going on, collating new data, which is why for me, launching the Gynae Project with the survey was essential, because what's missing is data. Um, and yeah, the Gynae Project, yeah, is collating that.
It's part of what you're also going to be looking to do to shift the narrative, shall I call it, around what a stigma around period talk, because I know a lot of times we talk about when period, especially at work, it's like unprofessional or it's inappropriate or it's embarrassing. And then I listen to you then talk about, okay, you have those all those negative perceptions, but then you also have a lot of women, like you just said, who are going through things where actually, if you're going through periods, you're going through pain. So how are you expected to be able to just get up and do your job and carry on as per normal when you're also going through pain? If someone else is going through pain and they had I don't know, foot or arm or something was wrong with them or they had a migraine, they'll be like, go either go home, go doctor, or whatever it is. So how do you begin to change the narrative of something that has this negative, still a very negative connotation
Yeah.
behind it, apart from just the what you're doing with the data as well?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that narrative, that's a really good question. The narrative change for me all started with how I wanted to present women's health. So that presentation for me has to reflect how women show up in everyday life. So the launch for the Gynae Project was actually a spin class. So for anyone who doesn't know, spin is like low and impact cycling on a stationary bike in the studio with music, with vibes, with lights, with all of the things. Um, and I'd in my own journey when I started to dial into like what are some of the lifestyle changes that I can make that I've seen statistically help with managing, with pain management, with flow, and with just general vitality, I noticed that there were four in particular. They were exercise, which I prefer to say movement because exercise I think connotes the gym, and not everybody loves gym, but I think movement's really important. Whether that's walking, whether that's dance, whether that's reformer, whether that's boxing, whether that's run club, like getting your body moving. Nutrition, so how balanced is your plate? There's a term that's called eat the rainbow, which essentially means having as many colors on your plate as possible, because that's where you're going to get the most nutritional value. Rest, so actually not just going to sleep, but actually your body actually going through the phases of sleep. So getting into your REM sleep, which is like the deep sleep where that's where you'll probably have a dream if you get into that sleep phase. So not only just going to sleep, but the quality of your sleep. And also stress. How high pressured is the job that you do? What are some of the external factors that affect how you show up in your relationships, in your family, at your workplace? How can you manage those things? Um, and when I started to take note of those four things, I actually saw a significant shift in how my period showed up in my body. It was nowhere near as painful. It was a lot more manageable. And I thought, actually, there's a missing piece of conversation here that is actually, I'm a believer in controlling your controllables. And if you can control how you move your body, what you eat, how you sleep, and your stress management, you actually have a better chance not only of your menstrual cycle regulating, and this is for like the regular person, this is really not necessarily for women who have got like a gynecological concern, because that's a bigger picture and a bigger conversation. But also, all of those things naturally just optimize your vitality. It enables you to like operate at your highest optimum output if you eat well, move your body, sleep well, and like manage your stress. So I wanted to launch the business with something that tapped into one of those. Um, and doing something physical is always fun. So the launch was called On Your Cycle, and it was a meeting of menstrual cycle conversations and exercise. So I think changing the stigma comes from changing the presentation. In my that's the approach I'm taking, which is changing the presentation of how gynecological health and women's health is presented. Because I think health isn't very sexy. Wellness has become more sexy. It's become more cutesy. It's become more mindful. It's become more demure. But health is not. Health is clinical, factual, statistics based, clunky, like it feels like a doctor. But for me, it's about bridging the gap between health, so the statistics and the data and all of that, and the wellness. So like, how can we live well but have the facts? So for me, it's definitely in the presentation of how I present gynae health to to community, to corporate, and everyone in between.
Love that. I love the framing you just kind of put in there because even that presentation is key. for such an area. I remember there was a poll, I was doing some research, I think it said like 85% of UK working women feel some stress or anxiety when it comes to like managing your period at work, as an example. And a lot of what was kind of reading that was talking about the fact that how it's presented and the image it still has adds to some of those stigmas, but you've been able to present it in a completely different way to open up people's minds, not just women, but actually the men in the workplace, people like me,
Yep.
like who are in those environments, to be able to recognize and to show up and to help and support, I think is really even more important as well. So the way you're kind of describing that, being able to you position it and look at it very, very differently. Even the launch you had with spin class, I would have thought that was like, wow, that's it's different, but that's good. That's interesting. And it opens up people's minds and people's minds and hearts, which is what you need to have the connection between both as well, not just in head knowledge, but heart knowledge
Yeah.
to care about the people who are next to you as well.
Exactly, exactly, and it's that it's about connecting head and heart, and also building community. I think for a long time, women have just not wanted to talk about their periods, let alone talk about it in a space outside of their like mum, sister, and immediate friend group. So for me, even from a practical perspective, right now, I'm keeping events strategically intimate because of the nature of the conversation. So not everyone's going to feel comfortable talking about their period to this girl that they was just sitting next to because they don't know. So keeping the room small, and I say small, which is like relative, but keeping the room, yeah, concise has really helped in not only building trust, um, but with the Gynae Project, but building trust in and amongst the other women in the space.
Does your work also feed into areas such as like endometriosis, which I know like affects like 1.5 million in the UK,
Yeah,
for example, as well?
yeah. So those types of concerns are definitely concerns that the work speaks to. So from endo to adenomyosis, PCOS, fibroids, polyps, cysts, and kind of the wider gynae concerns, they're things that um, definitely, definitely are on the radar to have more in-depth and specific conversations about with experts, because I'm mindful as well, like my approach is I'm the everyday woman. I'm the woman that experienced it. But I think, especially when it comes to gynae health, there always needs to be a specialist who works in the field. So I actually work really closely, excuse me, with a woman called Dr. Isra, who has 15 plus years of experience in obs and gynae. So the workshop that happened at the weekend with Black women in tech was co-led by myself and Dr. Isra, and having her expertise to speak to women has really helped amplify the the trust piece and the safety piece, because there's only so many questions I can answer, because in a lot of ways I am like the person in the audience. So having her expertise as well has been transformational.
What would you want to see happen with what you're building now?
There's two things. Um, I actually see a world where what happened with mental health, so having conversations about, being depressed or anxious was originally taboo, and kind of very hush hush, kind of shame taboo around it. I see a world where people talking about their gynecological health, and that goes from periods, fertility, menopause, it's just as open. So I'm working towards adding my piece to that puzzle. But the bigger North Star is to create a women's wellness center. So a place where women can come and meet people that can help them in those four areas of life. So meet a gynae, meet a nutritionist, meet a physical health specialist, a sleep specialist, and a therapist. And they can come and kind of get all of that information in one place. Something that doesn't feel clunky, feels like a spa, it's very cutesy, demure, and equally be able to ensure that women and girls don't feel like they have to keep their period a secret. The same way in a meeting, if you walked in, you said, "Oh, do you know what? I've got such a headache. I'm so sorry if I feel a little bit dazed today." I would love to see a world where a woman could go into work and say, "Do you know what, my period is doing a madness. I'm so sorry if I feel a little bit dazed today," and it not be like that. It'd be like, "Ah, oh, get it, girl," or like, "No problem." Um, and there, yeah. So that's the world that I see, where women can feel and girls can feel more empowered. Um, that they actually know what's going on within their bodies. They feel more empowered to talk about it without shame, without taboo, or embarrassment, and also have a space where they could come to get all of the lifestyle information that they need to manage their menstrual cycles.
What are the things that men can do to help support, learn, educate? I don't know what it is, but what are the things that you would want to see men in particular doing when it comes to this topic?
Yeah, I think don't shy away from having the conversation from a personal perspective. If you've got women in your personal life, yeah, don't shy away from having the conversation and initiating the conversation. Like, I'd like to learn more about menstrual cycles. Like, when did you start? How did it feel? And asking them what they think you could do to help. So, for example, at the launch for the Gynae Project, one of my really good friends, T, he said, "Can men come?" And I said, "You know what? For the first event, I actually think it's safer, and just more sensitive and tone and the right tone for it to just be all women." But he said, "Is there anything else I can do?" And he said, and I said, "Actually, you could come and like help with the setup and like help with the giving out the goodie bags and stuff like that at the end." So he did that. And for me, that was a real big, um, yeah, for him to lean into this, was really, really important. And like, I had a male capture, Olu, his name is, capture the content for the day. So having him lean into it as well. And I think in a lot of ways, asking the women in your life personally what you can do to help them. From a professional point of view, I actually think there is a this taboo is, I think, more rife there. So I think it's going to take policy change and kind of internal system change for there to be a space where men and women can have that conversation without a woman feeling really embarrassed to tell her male boss that I'm on my period today and I feel really uncomfortable. But I also think sharing, especially from me, from Gynae, sharing the work that I'm doing right now is really helpful. Like, the business is still in its infancy, so everything is about getting the word out, getting the survey out. So men sharing the survey, telling women in their life about what the work that we're doing. And I think the systemic change is going to take a while. But like, from a like, what can someone do today? I'd say that's the thing.
That's my last question to you then becomes, how do you define leadership?
I define leadership the ability to spearhead a idea, and in you spearheading it, inviting people along the journey. I also think leadership, like strong and long lasting leadership, is it starts with compassion, and it starts with understanding, um, and it does not include negative ego. I think wanting to be a leader and like attributing that to being the boss, yeah, I just don't think that gets people far. So I definitely think leadership is the ability to spearhead an idea, and inviting people along the journey with you.
When I think about how we started this conversation around both video curiosity and storytelling, and I think about what you're doing now, it's interesting to see how both of those two worlds come together. Your storytelling in the way that you are changing the narrative and perspectives around when it comes to gynecological health, but you're also both feeding your curiosity about through your experiences to be like, does it affect other people? I believe it does. Let me get the data for it. And then what can I do to impact change and make a difference? And all those different elements are kind of just flowing all the way through. And I always say when people step into their authenticity of who they are, they have a ripple effect that affects thousands and thousands of lives. And it's exactly what you're doing with the Gynae Project. And it's great to see. So I was like, get on there, let's talk about it, let's amplify it even more. Because whether it's men or women, whether it's corporates or whatever environment it is, this is a topic that needs to be known about. And people need to be getting you involved and plugged in to kind of come and educate other people and bring your network and bring your research and bring your community into these spaces to help transform the lives that affects so many people on a day-to-day basis in this area in particular. So we really love what you're doing. And yeah, keep on elevating and shouting about it as much as possible.
Thank you. And I also really love what you're doing. I think, um, especially from your LinkedIn presence, that's kind of where I engage with you most. I definitely think there is a really unique and brilliant way, actually, of how you speak to leadership, how you speak to allyship, how you speak to experience, how you speak to connection, how you speak to community, and all of those things. And I think your career has been a testament to the importance of finding the sweet spot between all of those things. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to come on your podcast. There's been a number of people come on here who I really admire. So to be sat amongst them, yeah, is an honor for me. So yeah, I'm grateful. So thank you.
Cool. All the information about the Gynae Project and how you can get involved will be available in the show notes. Make sure you definitely get involved and support. We'll see you all next week on Everyday Leadership.